call this to order. If Jared sneaks in, he can sneak in as we go.
See if there's growth.
So we'll call this October 21st, 2021 meeting of the Economic Development Authority to order. First order of business is approval of the agenda. Everybody got that in their packet? I'd be looking for a motion there.
I'll make that motion.
Motion from Mr. Drew. Do we have a second?
Second, Laura.
Second from Laura. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Agenda carries. We'll move on to item number 3, which is approval of the September 28th EDA meeting minutes that were included in your packet. There's no changes there. I'd be looking for a motion as well.
I believe there is a correction under the voting for the tax abatement. They have you as voting yay, and I believe you were not part of that, or at least do not want to be on record as part of that, so.
Oh, yeah.
There.
Good catch.
Did say.
It did say he would recuse himself.
Yeah,
But we forgot to remove it from there. Thank you.
Other than that, I would make that motion.
All right, good catch. Thank you. Ken makes a motion with the adjustment. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Molly. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Meeting minutes carried. All right, on to agenda item number 4, which is understanding Sherburne County's economy. I think Dan will let you introduce Bridget.
Yeah, I promised you a data-heavy meeting today. So every couple of years we contract with the Minnesota Extension to give us an update on the economy in Sherburne County. And with COVID last year, I thought it would be relevant as we look at our ARPA funding and what areas we might want to focus it on. So I'll introduce Neil and Bridget to talk about their data that they've came up with.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think we got fellow data lovers in here, so this is always very exciting for me. I'm Bridget Tuck, and I work for University of Minnesota Extension. My title is Senior Economic Impact Analyst, so I work across the state of Minnesota with communities looking at data and helping them understand their economy.
And I'm Neil Linscheid. I also work with Extension. I'm a community economics educator, and my service area is central Minnesota and southwest Minnesota. Has been for 15 years now. My role is more to help people take the data that we produce and put it into action, and then help them develop plans and processes, implementation of things that they'd like to do with that around economic and community development.
All right. So we prepared a very long report. We know it's really long, but there's a lot of really good data in there, and we don't expect that you would read every piece of it, but there's things that we hope you would use as a reference, right? Like you might be talking about something, oh, let's go look at that data that we have. But I did want to just kind of walk through a couple of things this morning, and I wanted to focus, to Dan's point, of kind of about what happened with COVID and how that affected Sherburne County's economy. So we just have the report up here on the screen, and we can just kind of look at some of the results. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that the data that we use is the quarterly census of employment and wages. And this is important, I think, in this discussion today, because it's a count of how many employees people have at a certain time. So any business that has to participate in the unemployment insurance program, which is most employers, they have to report how many employees they have at a certain date. Now, where that comes into play here is that I think with the workforce and the situation that we're in now, it's not always clear when you see that the number of jobs is down, if that's because they aren't hiring or because they can't hire, right? So like you may have had 50 employees, 5 of them leave, you're down to 45, you can't fill those positions. So when you do the count at the beginning of the next month, you're still at 45, right? Even though you'd like to be at 50. So keep that in mind. I think that is starting to play into some of this data when we deep dive into some of the industries. Just kind of keep that in mind. It's a count of how many people you have, not where you would want to be. So this first chart here just shows the number of jobs in Sherburne County over time. And I think there's a couple of things that jump out for me when I look at that chart. The first is just, Sherburne County has been just growing, right? The number of jobs, this has been an area that's growing population-wise, business is coming, you continue to add jobs. It's been very, very strong in that regard. COVID-19 really didn't have that big of an impact, so that very last piece there is Q1 of 2021. So you can see the drop that happened in 2020, but if you look back to what happened in the Great Recession of 2008 to 2012, you see that dip and the kind of length of that dip. COVID really wasn't even in the ballpark, right, for you guys at least. And you see recovery already, and you can see even when you went down in 2020, you still had as many jobs as you did in 2017. So it's just not necessarily a huge impact on your economy compared to others. And if you look at that second table then, I was just trying to parse it down and see how you came out. And I think what it shows is just how resilient Sherburne County's economy is. So between 2019 and 2020, so during COVID, you saw about a 4% drop in the number of jobs compared to Minnesota, which saw a 6% drop, and the United States at 5%. So you fared better during the crisis, and now coming out, you've got a 2% increase compared to none at the state level and 1% nationally. So didn't affect you quite as hard, and you're recovering a little more quickly than the state and the nation, which just shows that the mix of industries you've got here did better.
Question, was there any ask, or is there any way to find out, did relief money help these businesses stay where they were? Like whether it came from the county level, the federal level, wherever they could access it, did that help them sustain?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that we have data on that. We could look at, how much, I think we did look at the PPP payments that came into the county
Yeah.
and kind of where they went, but I don't know that we have evidence to show that affected this trend.
Another quick question on data collection. How are positions, like temp positions and staffing agencies, how are those jobs accounted for?
They would be counted as, when you're doing your count, I've got 500 people, they would be part of that 500.
Okay, so that data is collected from the agency or from the employer?
I think it's counted from the employer, but I can't be 100% sure of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure because of where our employment bases are and how manufacturing heavy they are, there's a lot of use of staffing agencies.
Right.
And those staffing agencies might be headquartered across the river in a different county. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
we're capturing that somehow.
That's a good point. And I'm not sure how they count for unemployment insurance. I mean, who pays the unemployment insurance?
Right, I'm sure it might be different in different circumstances, so.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So then I just wanted to bring your attention to chart 3. This is where I started to kind of dive down into what industries really felt the impact of COVID, because we know it wasn't an equal opportunity sort of thing. So the dark bars there, the maroon, is the change in the number of jobs in those industries from 2001 to 2019. So I was trying to show who are your growth industries, who's really been growing over time. And you can see there healthcare has been absolutely adding jobs. That's a national trend. Manufacturing, you mentioned you have a strong manufacturing base. They were growing. Along with, I thought, kind of surprising because we don't talk about it a lot, leisure and hospitality really was adding jobs. And then the gold there is the decrease in the number of jobs between 2019 and 2020. So you can see leisure and hospitality took the largest number of job losses, along with healthcare really took a few. And I think I do this chart because I've seen it in other counties and other places where the job gains over that 10-year or 20-year period are completely wiped out by COVID. And you don't see that here either. So that's, again, just a sign that, you fared a little bit better. But it does give you some hints as to what industries really were more affected by COVID-19. And then I wanted to kind of dive into who's not recovering, right? So who's really still struggling? Because as you look at, how do we target our ARPA funding, this might be helpful to look at. So in this table 3 here, what I did first is I looked at industries that lost jobs between 2019 and 2020, and then who continued to lose jobs into 2021. So they lost jobs during the COVID thing, and they're still shedding jobs. And I think kind of concerning for you is that ambulatory healthcare, right? Healthcare was a driver, and they're still struggling to recover from COVID. And this is where I got into the question in my head, is that because they don't have demand and aren't hiring, or is this because they just can't find workers? And so if they could find workers, they'd be adding. I don't have an answer to that, but it's a question to ask yourselves, is this a result of they don't have demand? Because we know ambulatory healthcare was one that did a lot of layoffs because they weren't doing the extra services and stuff there for a while, and so they laid people off. ambulatory healthcare is like physician's office, dentists, that kind of thing. So the question in my mind is, are they not coming back because they don't have demand, or are they just unable to find workers?
We did have a clinic close in Zimmerman. That might have something.
And that might,
Yeah.
yep, that could affect it. So you can see the other ones that were kind of in that same situation. Some of your grant-making civic organizations, your furniture and home furnishings, but kind of biased. I always think that's Becker Furniture World. So you can just kind of see, you know, utilities. You guys kind of knew that stuff was happening, right, with what's going on in utility stuff. So it just gives you some insights into where maybe there are some questions to ask yourselves. And then the second half of this table looks at industries that lost those jobs and have recovered a little bit of them into this year, but not nearly mitigating the losses, right? So like if you look at food services and drinking places, lost 264 jobs because of COVID and have recovered 27, right? So like still continuing to maybe not jump as quickly back into recovery. So again, maybe some insights there as you think about what do we want to target. And then I thought this was interesting. This was new data that we came up with this year. And this is just tracking your number of businesses. So you can see business growth has been very strong in Sherburne County over the last like 10 years or so. But that really did take a pretty big dive with COVID, right? Like, so you saw businesses closing, right? They just weren't making it. And I think the reason that I focused on that a little bit is because if you go to the next chart, this really shows how much those new businesses are driving your economy, right? So business starts, this is the percentage of jobs created in a particular year. They came from either business starts or new companies coming in. So you can see anywhere from like 40 to 50, even up to 80% of your jobs coming from new businesses being started in Sherburne County. And if your number of businesses are dropping, your number of jobs is probably going to be affected eventually at some point too. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that you do have a lot of business driven by new businesses being created. You know, typically we see more jobs from businesses expanding, and Sherburne County was really benefiting from those business starts. So that's all I have for kind of the COVID impacts. Neil's going to talk a little bit more about kind of some industry-specific stuff, but if you guys have questions about my part of the presentation, I'd be happy to.
Quick question on that last chart 5 that we were going over. Do you have the ability to parse that data for independent sole member new businesses versus, I don't know where you're pulling the data from, but that'd be an interesting thing to look at.
Okay.
Whether it was just sole member LLCs that dipped or it was actual.
Yeah, this is a new data source that we started using, and so I don't know totally what's in there either.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just if you have it, that'd be cool.
And you mean sole proprietorships versus LLCs? Is that the sort of distinction?
I guess single member. So whether it's you know, an in-home business with a sole member, or there's actual W-2 payroll employees.
Oh.
Is one, you know, if it's a sole member thing, it could indicate if less starts, or it could indicate that they are back into the workforce for more security in uncertain times type deal versus being off on their own too. It'd be an interesting piece of that data set. This is.
We'll try.
Thanks.
Other questions? All right, so another part of this report that I'll just mention that is here, but I want to move on to a different section. Just want to give you the highlight, is that there is information this time on population characteristics and demographic changes in the report, and just a few headlines from there is that we saw that population in Sherburne County is not surprising to any of you, but it's more concentrated in the what did I say, the southeast and the northwest. And we mapped that by census tract. So you'll see that, and there'll be more if we come back next year. Hopefully we'll have the 2020 census, and that will be the most accurate information about these sorts of things. But these are good estimates for now. We had estimated population by block group, but also a table here that I think is worth just looking at and thinking about, in that Sherburne County is becoming more diverse. That there were, the white population grew by almost 40%, but then when we look at the African American and Asian populations, those grew significantly more, and we have the counts of that growth here as well. So, you know, decade to decade, we would anticipate that this will continue into in the 2020 census, and that we'll see that in the next coming years as well, as Minnesota is becoming a more diverse state, and we see these trends just continuing to accelerate. That is important to know and to be thinking about. We were able to look at where that growth of population was concentrated, and we saw that the estimated count of the population that were people of color was focused more in specific census tracts. And I think what I saw is that that census tract in the St. Cloud area was really the area where you had the most people of color in Sherburne County, and that might be an area where, if you're interested in working on diversity, inclusion, or those type of topics, that would be an area to focus. You also see that your larger cities are more diverse than the smaller cities or the townships outlying those cities. We also looked at the population or the incomes of the population and households, and you saw that there are some differences. Again, that census tract in St. Cloud is a much lower median household income than the other parts of the county, and then also the cities around Elk River and Big Lake or Monticello. Some of those census tracts have lower median household income than other parts of the county, and that was just the thing that we wanted to show you. And those are reflected in some of the community development block grant opportunities that are available from the federal housing and urban development. Those census tracts that are eligible are here in purple, so you can see those, and those really shouldn't be a surprise if you had looked at the incomes as well. And that one of the primary drivers of eligibility is income. So that's just a high-level overview that those things are there for your information. What I'd like to spend the majority of my time on is something that we did this year to look much more closely at the sub-industries that were in the county, and to try to understand which of those sub-industries really had some high specialization versus the national averages of employment. And the tool that we use to do that is called a location quotient. That's this column over here. And location quotient is it's comparing the concentration of employment at the national level versus the concentration of employment at whatever level we choose. In this case, this was the county level. So employment in machine shops is something like 12 times higher here than it is at the national level. And the same with wood, kitchen cabinet, and countertop manufacturing, about 22 times higher. And then distilleries, which is about 56 times higher. We included the wages in those industries and also the employment counts. And I think the first one I'd like to focus on is the machine shops. So machine shops are interesting because they are a large share of employment. There are also a lot of firms here in Sherburne County. And that's not something that happens everywhere. So we looked a little bit closer at those machine shops, and sorry to scroll down too fast here. But this map shows you the geographic distribution of jobs in the machine shops and machine shop industry across Minnesota. And something that I think is just worth you all knowing and thinking about is that concentration here in Sherburne County is very high, but if you look, there's a pretty strong pattern here. It's almost a corridor of machine shop employment in Minnesota. Now, we speculated a little bit in the report on what that might be. There's a few factors it could be. One is history. There were There's machine shops that have been around a long time and they have been successful and they grew and they've found ways to specialize and become competitive in their own specific niche products that they make. Another thing that might be the case, just from some ad hoc interviews with people involved in the industry, is that machine shops are a really important component of the medical device industry that is strong in Minnesota. And that many of the components for medical devices are made here in Minnesota, and this would reflect something like that. What we don't know for sure is exactly why the concentration of machine shops is so strong in this corridor. And so some activities you could consider as an economic development group would be partnering with other counties nearby, since this seems to be regional, to ask them if they have some sense of why there's such a high concentration. But also even more of the high touch and engaged strategies might just be to invite machine shop firm owners to visit with you, or whether that's interviews or meet with a few of them to really start to understand what it is about this area that is making it such a high concentration of machine shops. But we see that as an opportunity and something that maybe you did or didn't realize. Maybe you realize that there's a lot of machine shops around, but that the concentration and the specialty is really unique. That's not everywhere.
Closer to the cabin.
Closer to the cabin? Yeah.
That's what we always joke. We always say they locate halfway between their house and the cabin.
There you go. And I'll pause here. I mean, do you have any sense as an economic development group members what it is that makes for so many machine shop companies here in this
A lot
region?
of it is family history. There's a
Family
lot
history.
of family-based companies that were built. They're not all in the family now, but the structure was here, the infrastructure was built.
There are some tech schools in the area, so a lot of those students stay around.
Yeah, I'd say a good chunk of it is out of this. It's a cultural fit too. A lot of the manufacturers and the type of employees that they need and attract also live out in this area. So you'll see that quite a bit. But Rayanne's right. There's a good chunk of second and now getting close to third generation shops that have just consistently grown over time as well in this area. And a lot of them, you can even track their history. A lot of them kind of kept shifting out. So a lot of them started in like the Maple Grove, Osseo area, first generation, and then have kind of just gradually moved out as they've shifted generation and grown, because the ability to grow out here is a little bit cheaper than it is to grow in Maple Grove or Osseo. So their footprints have grown where it's more affordable to grow, I think. So I think that's a good chunk of it at least. And I think medical's a driver, but a lot of ours, we have a lot of aerospace and defense as well. So it's a pretty good mix of both of those.
Good mix. Yeah. Well, that's, I think it's an area where further attention could be placed, and hopefully as you're out and you're having interactions with those types of companies, you can ask those kind of questions and maybe bring that information back here and continue to refine your ways that you can help machine shop firms.
And then a question on that too, when you look at the wages and stuff.
Sure.
Some of the factor that we do have struggle with at times is pay versus where they can go somewhere else. And we're trying to, are we making any headway there that your information shows that we're getting better in that regards to compare to having to drive to the metro or something that you could work closer to home?
Well, we could look at the average wage change by industry. I didn't look at it in here. I think that by industry is the better way to do that than sort of in general. And that's because that's where that competition is happening among employees, that they're saying, well, I could maybe go to the next place for $1 more an hour. And that's that balance. When we just look broadly across the county, I think we just get too much noise with the variation in wages.
Okay.
But we could certainly, I could put for a few of these industries, how the wage structure has changed, and maybe a comparison to nearby counties, especially in the metro.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Well, I know Bridget has a few things she wants to get into, so I'll just say, in the report, we did the same thing that I just described to look at the wood cabinet manufacturing. And again, there's sort of a corridor, seeing kind of you're part of a regional economy. And this industry has been growing and it has a lot of concentration as well. So the other one that we included and thought was interesting was the distilleries, which we know y'all worked a little bit on. And you have the highest employment in Minnesota in that industry here in Sherbert County, partly because of the project, I think.
We just happen to have one of the biggest distributors, so,
Oh, yeah. Manufacturers, US Distilleries.
and also some really good brews. We always say we have great water for that.
There you go. The last thing I'll share, and then I'll hand it to Bridget, is just that in the back of this report, oh boy, that's a lot of scrolling, okay. The back of this report, for each of these industries, we assembled these industry summary reports for you. And I just want to find the first page of it for you.
That one on the wage one might
Yeah,
answer
the
her
wage
question,
one
actually.
might be there yet, is it?
Well, there's the kind of, there you go.
So
Yeah, that's good.
wages are higher here.
We need to start promoting that.
If you scroll down, it's kind of interesting to scroll down because
That's
they,
versus the national average, not the metro area.
yeah, national, but.
Which one would you like to do?
Well, I
Didn't
thought
mean to
sometimes
burst
they
your
have the
bubble.
breakout by like veterans, like this one, yeah.
Sure. So this is the workforce profile here. So again, it's using the U.S. as the middle of that, the index here. Not as many people retiring soon. Not quite as diverse as the U.S. workforce in this industry, but right, gender diversity is pretty balanced compared to, it's on par with the U.S. average. The other thing to see here in this industry, and then I'll move on, is there are some pieces of like who is posting positions right now. This isn't all the positions that are posted, it's sort of what can be easily sourced from online postings, and we know that there's more, but I think it gives you a good sense of where those are. And then where people moved when they did a job transition from what industry to which other industry. I believe in this one we have it scrolls too fast, sorry. Here it is. What is the skill profile that is related to working in a machine shop? And how has that changed? So
Wow,
we see
look at that increase in welding. Really went from.
welding,
Maybe we need
machining,
it.
fabrication.
to-
Your partnerships with those community colleges, with this industry to help understand that. Again, these are good paying jobs. This is a highly specialized area. It's part of this regional effort. So it just seems like something that if you haven't had a lot of activity there, you could start with even some basics and you might learn a lot.
Well, we've done more with our local schools and the manufacturing companies, partnering with them for on-the-job skills instead of promotion of college consistently. So that, I think, is what, I don't know if we really partner, at least at our level, with any of the community colleges, but we do partner with the schools.
We did with Anoka Tech.
Anoka Tech.
It was on their foundation board for a while.
So this is really cool, like again, like Neil and I love data, so we could like just play with this all day. So we tried to give you some examples, but we do have these reports basically for every industry. So if there is ever a specific thing that you guys are looking at and you're like, hey, I'd really like to see this for whatever, we can certainly get these reports for you pretty quickly, so. We'll just offer that as an opportunity. But I think there are some cool things that you can do around, who are your workers and where, in these particular industries, because it does tell you a lot. So I'll do more scrolling. This is fun. But we did also, kind of more as a baseline, we've done this every year for you guys. We've done just a little bit of a profile on different industries. So I won't go through every one because we've got a ton in here in this report. But what we did for each one of these industries, and I'll just use construction because we're here, we looked at what jobs were like in 2001 to 2020, so you can see, was this industry growing or shrinking or what was happening? And then we broke out into these it's called shift share analysis, but the idea here is to see, was that growth driven by national trends, by industry trends, or by something that was happening here locally? So when you see national growth is just like, the national economy grew during this time period, you should have added jobs just because the economy grew, right? So out of that 360 jobs that you added in construction, 182 can be attributed to just the economy growing, okay? But that industry mix is negative. So what's that saying is nationally, the construction industry actually shrunk and you guys grew. So that competitive effect is pretty highly positive. And what that's saying is there's something about Sherburne County that construction flourished here. And again, it might be to your point about skill sets and who lives here. And that's kind of, there's a synergy there. Might be because you're closer to the metro. And again, companies are out here and go down in the metro and do a lot of work. Could be a lot of different things. But when you're looking at that, I always like to look at that competitive effect because there's industries where you lose jobs, but your competitive effect is super positive. And what that means is you lost jobs, but you retained a lot of jobs that you would have lost had you followed those national trends. So it just gives you some insight into what was driving some of the change that you might see. And then we added the impact of adding 100 jobs. So if you were to add 100 jobs in construction, and we just picked 100 because it's easy to compare industries then, you can see that the totally you would create 137 jobs in Sherburne County. So there'd be 100 construction jobs, but then that indirect and induced is a breakout between indirect is supply chain. So you would have 18 more jobs created at the companies that provide supplies to the construction companies. And that induced is related to employment spending. So the workers have money and they're going out and buying groceries and whatnot. They're creating economic activity. So with construction, it usually ends up being about the impact about 50-50, a breakout, because construction jobs pay well. And so it's typically in any construction budget, it's about half is for inputs and half for labor. So you see those indirect and induced usually coming out that way.
I'd like to, based on that, we do have someone in the room that is totally invested in construction.
Okay,
so
cool.
Is that numbers that
If that's about
you,
No, that's very accurate.
And then this just shows where those, the next chart then shows where those impacts would be. So the indirect, again, are the supply chain, so they're high in things like building materials, right? Probably one of your top expenditures is to buy the stuff, right? But then the impacts you can see related to the workers having their money and going out to eat and paying their bills and that kind of thing. So just kind of gives you a sense of where are those impacts, where do they break out. So we have that for every industry. I don't want to go through them all, but one that really pops out because you guys we were talking about it a little bit and you said you invested in it is these distilleries. Their economic impact is kind of crazy. They are generating economic activity too. So
youngsters like to drink their beer.
And on that note, we will have a brewery revolving loan fund application next month. So
you can kind of see where those impacts play out too. So we did understand that you guys have been talking to Extension a little bit about agriculture and the importance of ag in Sherburne County. So unfortunately, ag data is really hard to come by. I spent a few hours the last couple of days trying to find some data for you around agriculture. And most of our data comes from the Census of Ag, which is only every 5 years. So it's tough to find real trend data. So what I did and I can have Dan share this with you later, but I didn't get to it till late yesterday, is I did do the economic impact of 100 jobs in ag, just so you can see it compared to if you make an investment, what could the potential impact be? And so it is, for every 100 jobs, it's 132, is that right? 132, so comparable in a way to construction. And then that report will have that breakout of where those impacts will be. The other thing that, and I don't know, Keisha, to put you on the spot over there, but can you, oh, sorry, well, the sign says
Oh.
Keisha. Chrissy. Could you could you go just to the internet and just Google Sherburne County Ag Profile? Or do you not have internet? Oh, you have, we have, oh, we can hear. Where do we?
You can show the utility one when you've got everything.
Maybe
Oh, okay,
use
sure.
the budget for a couple of mouses next year if you have a good tax income. Just saying. I probably would go back to the front desk after we're done.
You would think with a brand new room that
Are you able to do it, or you need the mouse still? Mouse will.
I'm not getting into business or nothing, but
We appreciate the input.
Sounds like he's looking for an opportunity to donate to the cause.
No, he's.
He can sponsor a couple mice.
He probably thinks his donation, probably should have already got a couple of mine.
This be that top one right there. Yep. And so this is probably the best that I can come up with for the time being. But you do have an increase in the number of farms, a 10% increase from 2012. I would love to see what the 2022 would be the next census. So you did see an increase there. What's interesting to me is that average size of farm is 205. Okay, so full disclosure, I live on a farm. So I got 205 acres is not really large anymore by ag standards. So I live on my family farm and it's 220 acres, but we are tiny, right? We're just little. People probably laugh at us. But so I pulled like Renville County, which is the largest corn, soybean and corn, like one of the largest, and their average farm size is something like 600 acres. So just to give you some perspective, you are kind of a small farm area, but you're growing in the number of farms. So that was kind of interesting to me as well. But this is the best I can do in terms of real data. And if you scroll down, there's more on the next page too that just kind of gets into kind of what are you growing, kind of a sense of that. Obviously, you guys know that you're like number one, I think, in potatoes, right? And you're number one in cultivated Christmas trees. So
Sand grows good Christmas trees and good potatoes.
and you got a lot of nursery and greenhouse type stuff as well.
When you talk about farms now and the increase in farms,
Yep.
Does it show you, because we've been made aware that there is these smaller farms, more of a cottage industry style. Are what we're reflecting in here, not necessarily your larger acre farms?
Yeah, so if you scroll down there, 14% of your farms sell directly to consumers. And that's so that would be your cottage, like your farm to market, your Christmas tree guys, they sell directly to consumer as well. So 14%, I think, is actually a very high number. I could pull some other counties just to give you perspective, but yeah, you definitely have that going on.
We haven't noticed our potato farm.
But your potato farmers are probably the same, right? But you're increasing, and it could be, I don't know how it's playing out, and maybe Dan, you have a better sense if it's bigger farms getting kind of chunked off a little bit, and so you're getting more, individual operators, or if it's people just getting 10 acres and.
But this is good to understand while we're talking about helping that industry of that smaller cottage growth.
Yep, you definitely got it going on. And then, I think if you look at some of your characteristics there as well, you've got almost 300 female farmers. You've got, some in that younger age category, and you've got,
that would be your
you got veterans.
Diversity.
Huh?
That would be supporting diversity.
Yeah, supporting diversity. You've got, and I think maybe to your point too, 250 new and beginning farmers.
Yeah.
Right, so that's people that are coming, like your point, they're probably those, that tends to be that new organic small farm type thing, and they need support, right? They're not coming in with, like in my family farm, my kids are fifth generation, right?
of
We've been
knowledge.
passing the knowledge and the wealth and everything down. These are people who are, coming in brand new, don't have all the skills,
Great information.
so.
And Bridget, I think we learned about your interest in this just a few days ago. So we're both interested in exploring it more, and it just might take a few more days, weeks for us to be in there. I know that you're thinking of.
There's a little urgency to it.
Yeah, we tried, I had about 4,000 things on my schedule the last 2 days, but I tried to figure out what, I even, because I know you guys like data, I even consulted, so I'm economic development, and I do ag stuff, so I know the ag data to some extent, but I consulted the actual ag data person. I'm like, what can we get?
Well, and
This is about it, so.
even what you're supplying here is helpful in the decision that we are looking at making, because I think it supports the idea.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to pull. I should pull some data maybe for some other counties, just so you can see, because that new and beginning farmer number seems really high to me compared to other counties where, again,
Well, I'm having trouble connecting the dots here because we haven't created any more ag land. We haven't, taken out part of the Sherburne County Forest or anything, so how are the numbers of operators going up when the numbers of acres aren't? How is that?
can you scroll back up to the top?
And with solar too, Ken, solar's taking
Yeah.
a lot of,
What?
solar's taking a lot of ag acres away.
So
in the
that's,
county
that's
too.
I'm sorry, I went to the eye doctor
Taking
yesterday,
away,
but that's a
yeah.
negative,
So they have more
17%, that's
Negative
Disconnect
7.
somewhere in here.
They're just getting smaller.
They're getting smaller, because if you look there at the average size of your farm,
Breaking them up.
yeah,
Well, and I
it
think-
went down by
Selling off 30
17%.
acres. Just
Okay,
somebody or
so
something.
That's because of the solar.
So your your average size is decreasing, and the land in farms is decreasing, to your point.
I think that it'd be interesting to know
So you're-
what the umbrella would designate, what a farmer is.
Yeah,
right?
okay, yeah.
If it's someone running 4 greenhouses and
Yeah.
selling flowers to grocery chains, I'm not saying they're not a farmer, but
Right.
for our conversation, wouldn't necessarily fit into that mix.
I think acres of production is maybe more of as of a relevant term,
Yeah.
statistic as number of farms.
Yeah, and the land in farms has gone down slightly. So yeah, you're doing like kind of like, it's interesting, you're doing like a lot of outstate greater Minnesota counties, the farms are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Because they're consolidating. You guys are almost doing the opposite here. You've got all this pressure, development pressure, right, that you've been facing for a number of years about land and going from ag to commercial and residential. And your farms are getting smaller, but you're getting more of them. So people are looking at, they can't compete probably on a price point to produce corn.
Well, in the shift to direct-to-consumer models, I mean, that allows smaller operations to be more profitable where
More
they
profitable.
couldn't be.
And
a
you're right
decade ago.
here, you're close to them, you're really close, like that, your location again, you're close to that metro, so they can produce cheaper out here and sell into.
It is an emerging industry that I don't think is gonna go away.
Yeah, I mean,
More specialty farming, I think.
more special.
And I think the big, at least in what we're talking about, the bigger discussion for me is what tools we need to support that. Are they business tools or are they ag tools that are needed is
Yes,
the question,
and
right?
I think, and you can ask this question of Lori when she comes back from Extension. We do have a, which maybe would just be a good connection point. We do have, Extension has a new and emerging farmers program that I believe is being run out of Pine County. I was involved, because we're doing some work around ag tourism as well. And so I was involved, like, how do you do some training around ag tourism with new and emerging farmers, and what might that look like? And ag tourism would be a thing here for you guys too, absolutely part of that. Neil pointed out too, if you scroll, I'm sorry to make you scroll back. If you scroll back down just a little bit, there, start right there. You do have a breakout of value by sales and by farm size. So it gives you a little bit of a sense, you do have quite, like almost half are in that small, less than $2,500 worth of sales. So you do sometimes end up a little bit, some of the metro counties with people who have, you know, like 5 or 10 horses or something and call themselves a farm because then they can, yes. Right, so there's a little bit of that, you know, factors in here, but I think back to that new and emerging farmer number, that's maybe where you might think about, that number is going up. So anyway, there's a lot of, I think to get, I mean, I guess now that I look at that, there's a lot of data that might be helpful for you guys in your conversations here.
Thank you for throwing that together on short notice.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Accent.
I
Getting us
Googled, I was
access
like,
to
hey, I gotta
some-
look at that. I know we got profiles for every county. But I could do some, are you interested in some comparison to other counties, just so you know, like, is 250 a big number, or is it
Right, because I was just
nothing? I
gonna
don't know, I
say,
mean,
you had something in Pine County. Is Pine County bigger than the 250 number we're showing?
yeah, I don't know. Or you just invested in the educator, and
You might be in the wrong county for doing that program.
I like all of the counties.
Oh,
But to that point, we are, and I told Dan this yesterday, I'll invite you, we are doing a series of workshops on focus on agriculture at a county level, and we're doing them across the state of Minnesota, kind of under this idea of rural stress. You know, got a lot of pressure on farmers right now, and then we had a drought year and everything like that. And Sherburne County is one of the counties that we're hoping to do the workshop in, so I would invite all of you, when we get to that point, to come and do more fun with data and really focus on ag and what that. We could get into more of this nuanced stuff. It won't be before you have to set your budget though, as a county.
but you provided some information that can be somewhat helpful towards that idea.
It would be nice to have a chart like this over a few decades. You know, you say it's
Yeah.
every 5 years, if you could go back 10 years and see how that growth curve
Yeah.
looks.
Yeah, it would only be every 5 years, but at least you could see
Yep.
the changing trends.
And I'm assuming, is there enough data already generated by the transition that a lot of our farms are starting to transition to, instead of growing a crop, they're growing solar panels? And that's just been in the last,
If it's USDA data, I'd imagine
2
it's
years or
active,
so?
actively farmed acres.
it would be
Yeah, well, they would
interesting.
have to see, I mean, where the complication would come in is that, so if you own a farm and you still farm 80% of it, but you put 20% into solar, you'd still be reporting an income, and you would probably still be reporting
Under
farmland. I don't know how
So
you
it'd
would
be hard
report that.
to,
Because, I mean, we're looking at losing at least 3,500 acres of ag land, potentially a lot more.
solar.
Yeah, just in the next few years, so.
I can ask my answers back.
And that's not including the small ones that are still coming in.
Is that question about the solar and ag land, is that a high priority? Do you need information about that?
No, I don't think it's high priority. I think,
It'd just be nice to understand.
really, I think it's just a question of how the data is collected. How is an acre of ag land determined? Does it have to be actively farmed, or is it just the underlying designation as ag? If we knew that, we could figure it out.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this data always comes from the Census of Ag, so it's how do they write the question in the I mean, because a lot of times they're leases from the farmer, right? The
Right.
solar company leases the land, so the farmer's still gonna think of it as his farmland,
Right. Because they're
but he's not
reporting to-
producing on it, so I don't know
But
how.
maybe a question has to be inserted,
Yeah, so-
having to do with that. Have you changed any of your farmland to support
yeah,
solar panels or something of that nature? Because
yeah,
this is such a new emerging thing
yeah.
that I think the industry has to adjust.
So you'd have to just look at the survey and see how does it ask
Right.
active, because
I
you got the
think-
same thing going on with like CRP land. That's, the farmer's gonna own that, but it's in CRP, so it's not active production either, so.
So I think there has to be an understanding at some point.
Yeah, that's, I'd have to look at how.
We can
USC
get Dan to give you guys a little more concise direction, so we don't send you.
Because we have trouble doing that.
Well,
Some of us have trouble.
In the very near term,
Some of us.
in the very near term, the comparison of other counties' agricultural profiles would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'd say
Is
if we
that a
just
week?
took
I just,
This is
the
22.
neighboring
22.
counties, I'd say.
And is that helpful in the next week, or 2 weeks, or 2 days? How soon do you need?
2 weeks, probably.
Or less, Dan's looking.
2 weeks.
Week and a half.
Okay,
We'll say a week. See what else we can do in a week.
Is that a trend just across the state is moving more farmland into solar?
No, it's just here because we have more of the or the transmission lines.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that's necessarily a huge concern for us. We're trying to make a decision, the county board's trying to make a decision as far as investing in additional ag education staff. And we haven't got the data to say that there's a demand for it, so we're trying to find that if it exists.
there's an opportunity, I think, right, to kind of partner with Sherburne and Benton counties.
Benton and Stearns,
Yep.
yeah.
So Dan asked me just quick to show the utilities numbers as well. And I assume it's no secret, right, that isn't the power plant decommissioning? Okay, good.
No, it's no secret.
It's not a secret. Okay, so this just kind of, I think it's good for communities. I know I've worked with a number of, so Fergus Falls, Otter Tail Power was kind of doing something with their plant. I've worked with Itasca County. They're also, Minnesota Power is looking at decommissioning their plant. So this is happening across the state, right, nationally. This is, but it's good for communities to kind of be thinking about what does that mean for our, they do have a fairly strong economic impact, and you probably are going to continue to lose jobs there. So what do it just gives you some insights, I think, into where some of those jobs might be and what kind of actions you might need to be thinking about taking to mitigate. And maybe for Sherburne County, your economy is growing nicely, so this isn't as much of an issue as it
Can you
might
just scroll up to that chart one more time? Just every year that amazes me that 100 jobs grows into almost 300 jobs just for utility. I don't think there's another sector that has it 3 times.
No, Distilleries was getting close. But otherwise, yeah, nobody's in that ballpark. And again, it's just a lot of money. And I assume I did pull your tax base data. It also is a big part of your tax base. I was like, there's public utilities? No county has this. I'm like, oh, yeah. So anyway, that's, I guess, all we have for you guys today, but hopefully you found it interesting and engaging. Dan tells me I got like 5 minutes, so any other questions?
No, I found it very, very helpful, and I know that the data gurus are gonna suck it all in.
We're gonna be just like, tonight you'll be like, oh, look at this chart.
I read my packet before.
Well, if there are questions or things that you'd like more data, we enjoy those, and we enjoy especially difficult ones and trying to figure that out. That's the fun of it,
Neil.
of this job. I enjoy asking Bridget difficult questions, but do feel free to let Dan know what those questions are, and we'll respond to them and get you that information. Or if there's a question about anything in the report already and you'd like clarification, we're happy to provide that.
Start thinking about how you're gonna figure out economic impact of the North Star Rail. Those requests are gonna start coming down the pike for you guys.
Well, Luke Greiner yesterday, we watched. He did a presentation yesterday for Government Affairs in St. Cloud, and I think he does cite, Region 7W, so it was really interesting, kind of comparing what you guys just showed and what he's showing for unemployment.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, he's really good.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bridget and Neil. All right. That'll move us on to item number 5, which is revolving loan fund program review.
Yeah, every year I like to give an update to the committee just to let you know where we're at with our revolving loan fund. So I did put a report in your packet. There's about $216,000 that is still loaned out, has yet to be paid back. 5 active loans. We did have 8, so 3 have been paid off already, which is a very high percentage. And then, like I said, we do have another loan expected next month to be under discussion. And we have about a $350,000 balance to loan out right now. So far, we haven't had any default payments, so it's been 5 years of the program and it's been going pretty smooth.
I think that speaks to the vetting process that was set up and stuff. It was very helpful.
Does anyone have any questions on that program for Dan?
I just have a question. There was a conversation that was talked about some of the revolving loan, plans aren't really being utilized right now because of the interest rates being so low, so they're finding other avenues. Is that what we're seeing as well?
We've had less questions, but we're still had 2 applications this year. You know, we're averaging about 2 a year, so last year we didn't have any during COVID,
Right.
but this year we had 2 again, so,
Okay,
you know, over the 5 years, we've averaged about 2 a year.
good to know.
I'd say our utilization is pretty fair. I mean, it's, when you look at revolving loan funds across the state, our utilization's up there, I think, compared to others.
And I know the Initiative Foundation has one, and theirs is still pretty active too.
All right, no other questions for Dan. Our next meeting is November 18th. And it sounds like we'll have a revolving loan fund application to look at, so attendance is encouraged highly. So we can make sure we can make decisions, especially coming into the holidays. And that being said, if there's no other business, I'll go ahead and adjourn. Thanks, everyone.